Warren Gamaliel Harding. To our fellow Americans, a word of advice: never trust a guy who uses the word normality in a public speech. Warren G. Harding was elected president back in 1920 and did so with his promises to restore the country back to its pre-World War I state. Yet his presidency was full of corruption and favoritism, prompting scandals and a poor approval rating. He was accused of bribery, adultery, and just being an all-around crappy pres. His horrible term in office even prompted what some call the Warren Harding error. Now that is definitely a major burn. Andrew Johnson. How did Andrew Johnson earn a spot on our list? Well, we must say that coming to office after Abraham Lincoln is definitely a tough job. Yet Johnson could have done it with a lot more tact. Instead, he nearly obliterated all of Lincoln's hard work. Immediately following Lincoln's death, Johnson supported the South. Longing to return to the white supremacy pattern of society, he used the Republican Congress's recess to push for pro-slavery laws. He granted pardons to and also allowed Confederate entities to take over control of some states and establish black codes. He even let some of John Wilkes Booth's associates slide by. Franklin Pierce. He may have been in office for only a few years, but Franklin Pierce was a long-standing supporter of the Confederate South despite being among Northern folks. Pierce had fought in the Mexican-American War, and his tendencies towards slavery translated into his presidency, what with adding more and more slave states and rubbing elbows with pro-slavery leaders. Among his other achievements were the Kansas-Nebraska Act and further backing of the Fugitive Slave Act. He really was a key proponent in the onset of the Civil War, believing that the abolitionists were a hindrance to furthering the leadership and sophistication of the United States. Millard Fillmore was the 13th president, way back in 1850. He had a solid beginning, a sort of rags to riches story as he made his way up the ranks in political circles. So what happened? He shoved morals and ethics to the side and favored being a politico. His approval rating tanked and did nothing to ease the build-up to the Civil War. Whoops. People wanted to quickly forget about him, and in fact, most folks have. Kids do not even learn about Fillmore anymore, and he is nearly obliterated from the nation's historical memory. Sorry about that, Millard, my dear. John Tyler. How can a president who earned the nickname his Excellency ever recover his public image? So it goes with John Tyler, who makes our list. He had such staggeringly depressing approval ratings that we do not even know how he hung in there for so long. Well, he managed to be president from 1841-45, but nearly his entire cabinet called it quits due to his crappy leadership. He also refused to set up a national bank. What? And he got kicked out of the Cool Kids Club when his party expelled him. He was almost impeached, but decided to step down when he realized just how hated he was. Ulysses S Grant. This is another United States president that allowed an onslaught of corruption within his political circle. He is most often referred to as a president who had a not-so-fruitful term in office, and he lacked a lot of the admirable qualities most of us look for in a presidential candidate. Ulysses S. Grant did not exhibit stellar public speaking skills, nor was he quite dominant in politics. In fact, he did not even like political affairs, and he was more quiet and under the radar. These qualities could have contributed to his lack of presidential prowess and thus landed him on our list. William Henry Harrison. It seems a bit unfair to put William Henry Harrison on this list considering that he died of pneumonia just a month after settling in the office. Yet as the 9th President of the United States, he seemed to be a bit strange and not a good decision-maker. I mean, what kind of dude just goes outside without some winter gear when it is freezing? He delivered his inaugural addresses without covering up, so of course he got sick. And back then, medicine was nowhere near what it is today. Talk, he was just doomed from the start. A pity, to be sure. Herbert Hoover. The 31st President of the United States was not a good one. He falls at number 3 on our list because he had a horrible reaction to the stock market crash which led to the Great Depression. Good times, good times. People had to embrace poverty or just die, and these Hoovervids as they were coined began sprouting up all over the country. Hoover supported prohibition, which made him even more hated. The guy just had to let us dig ourselves deeper and deeper into the pits. Finally, Franklin Roosevelt had to boot him out of the presidency and clean up the mess he had made. Richard Nixon. When it comes to Richard Nixon, we have just one word: Watergate. Nixon's presidency is often overshadowed by his scandal in which the Nixon administration refused to comply with the government as it investigated the break-in and leaks of conversations within the Democratic National Committee. Several people within the Nixon administration underwent illegal activities and the public was stunned and saddened to discover that the president had tried to cover it up. Nixon's presidency also saw devastating and clandestine bombings, thousands of deaths in the Vietnam War, and the whole purpose of the war is still frowned upon. After Nixon, the country was left broke and defeated. George W. Bush. This is a crappy presidency that is still ripe in most of our minds. Bush is despised for such a variety of reasons that we could make our own list of them. He was a proud supporter of the death penalty, he bought and bribed his way into office, he backed down on climate change, and he cut ties with various global partners. He is blamed a lot for the war in Iraq as well as the trouble and deaths that the United States suffered in Afghanistan. He portrayed himself as fully incompetent and unabashedly neglectful to the advice of the United Nations and other global leaders.